Robert Half research indicates 9 out of 10 hiring managers are having difficulty hiring. If you have open roles, chances are you're feeling this too. That's why you need Robert Half.
Our specialized recruiting professionals engage with our proprietary AI to connect businesses of all sizes with highly skilled talent in finance and accounting, technology, marketing and creative, legal, and administrative and customer support. At Robert Half, we know talent. Visit roberthalf.com today. Hello and welcome to Happier, a podcast where we talk about ways to become happier, healthier, more productive, and more creative. This week, we'll talk about why you might try a tip to tackle a topic, which is a real tongue twister, and we'll talk about a hack that is a different approach to the classic book club. Plus, we'll talk to Rohan Gunatillake, host of the thought-provoking podcast, Meditative Story. I'm Gretchen Rubin, a writer who studies happiness, good habits, the 5 senses, human nature. I'm in my little home office here in New York City, and joining me today from LA is my sister Elizabeth Kraft. And Elizabeth, you're always willing to tackle a hard topic with me.
That's me, Elizabeth Kraft, a TV writer and producer living in LA. And yeah, Gretch, I love to talk things through.
Yes, you sure do. And before we jump in, I want to remind everybody I am doing the Happiness Project Revisited course, and it is your last chance to enroll in this course for 2024. January 19th, 2024 is the final date. It's already underway, but you can still jump in. The best time to start a happiness project is 20 years ago. The second best time is January 19th. And if you use the code LASTCHANCE25, you can get 25% off at happiercast.com/course. It is so fun. I am loving doing my own happiness project. Of course, I'm so interested to hear what other people are doing. We're having a live check-in and coming up in a few weeks. This is really turning out to be something that it's a really, really great tool. So I hope people will check it out. happiercast.com/course and last chance 25 if you want the 25% off.
Yes. And then, Gretchen, we got this from Meg. She said, I'm writing after listening to episode 462 with the listener who had in-laws inundating her with too many gifts that are only tangentially related to her life. As someone who comes from a family like this, I had a couple of thoughts. First, do the in-laws know the listener well? I.e., is she close to them? Does she do things with them independent of family gatherings, etc.? It sounds like they are hunting for a personal connection. In my family of overbuyers, the desire to seize on a supposed interest at a gift-giving occasion really came down to not knowing the person super well. Second, I don't think the answer is just to roll with it, because then what the in-laws are really giving the listener is a never-ending task of having to dispose of things. The emotional effort of this will grind her down eventually, I know from experience. I'd suggest she use the advice you give at the top of episode 462 to state your preference. They are going to overbuy for her, so tell them what it is that you love to have in your life and have them take care of it. For example, I'm totally stocked up on olives now, thank you, but we've started making pizza on Friday nights at home, and while we have all of the supplies for it, we can always use a good olive oil. Also, if you get them to inundate you with consumables, then that's an easy donation to a food pantry if you don't want them. Lastly, she could also set a parameter around when she receives the gifts. From the letter, it sounds like she was given gifts every time she visited and not just at birthdays/holidays, which is a lot. Trying a few, I'm so appreciative of you thinking of me, but we don't need gifts every time we see you. Seeing you is gift enough. May move the needle over time.
Well, these are great suggestions, and I love the fact that this is a person who's clearly speaking from experience.
Yes.
This is a way that certain people express their affection, their love, their interest. It's very well-meaning, and these are really great suggestions for making sure that it's well-received as well as well-intended.
Yes, I like the suggestion for consumables. That was Smart.
Elizabeth, this week our Try This at Home suggestion is to try a tip to tackle a topic, which is like Peter Piper picking a peck of peppers.
We love alliteration.
We love alliteration. And research does show that alliteration makes ideas more memorable and more powerful. So we're using it this time. And the point of this alliterative suggestion is to deal with the problem. And Elizabeth, you and I have talked about this. This is something that we both have faced, which is you want to raise an issue or a question. You have a topic for a discussion. There's a topic that needs to be tackled, and the other person says, let's talk about this later.
Yes.
Or I don't want to talk about that.
Yes. This happens to me all the time, I have to say, with especially my husband, Adam.
Yeah.
Now, Gretchen, when we were growing up, we didn't really do this. We sort of just talked about things as they came up. I also think we are people who like to talk through problems.
Yes.
So it's natural to us to talk about a problem.
That is very true. But I will say that even when I don't feel like talking about something, I remember when Jamie and I were first together, like I remember being just surprised. Like I didn't know you could do that. Like I didn't know that was like a thing you could say, that you could just be like, I don't want to talk about that right now. And then people would just be like, okay. It was just never something that was in the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
And I have to say that I now do it sometimes myself, because once you know, you can just be like, let's do that later. Maybe it'll go away magically. It can be tempting if there's something that is going to be burdensome to talk about.
And one thing is, there's a difference between I don't want to talk about something, which I will say if it's, like say I got a pilot passed on. I may just not feel like talking about it because I don't feel like dwelling in it right now.
Yes.
That to me is different from let's talk about when we're going to go to Kansas City for Christmas. What day should I get the tickets? You know what I mean? There's different types of topics.
And there's certain things where it just has to be hashed out, or it needs to be hashed out, even if it's arduous or it requires a lot of calendar planning or is unpleasant, or there's a values conflict where it's like, okay, we're going to have to sort through different priorities. I mean, there are things that are just hard to talk about. They're just burdensome to talk about.
Yeah. And if you are dealing with someone who doesn't want to talk about something, it can be very easy to get frustrated and just give up.
Yeah. And this can become an issue because things aren't getting done in a timely way, or it becomes a source of conflict. So what's helpful, and this is why we have this tongue twister suggestion, is to think, are there ways to have an approach that will make it more likely that the other person will cooperate? And so here are some tips for tackling a topic. And that's whether you're dealing with children, sweethearts, family members, at work, if you're having trouble with a coworker who doesn't want to tackle a subject that you really need to nail down. Here are some ideas to try.
So the first idea, if you have more than one topic that needs to be discussed,
which you probably do.
Often do. You make a list and let the other person choose which topic they want to tackle.
Right. So they get to have some say. They get to pick the thing that's the least objectionable to them, and you get something done. And then you take it up again later, but you get something tackled. Another thing is if a person has something that they would like to discuss, because often, like, two can play this game, you're like, let's do a swap. You've been really wanting to talk about X. I really want to talk about Y. Why don't we set aside some time and we'll do both of them, or we'll like agree that we'll do yours, we'll do mine, and that way both people get what they want.
And then you could also do a topic roulette. Make a list and then just choose at random. I guess that's kind of gamifying it.
And then also you can let them choose the time. This is one, I have to say, from my personal experience, this one works really well with Jamie, because he'll say, I don't want to talk about that now. And then I'll say, just like not angrily, I'll just say, okay, well, how about after dinner? Or do you want to talk about it during the weekend? And then that person can pick a time where they think that they will be ready to deal with it. I do think that a lot of times this is something where giving the person more control and letting them suit themselves really helps. And you might say, but I'm doing this for everybody, or like, we're at work. Everybody needs this. Like, this isn't up to one person. But the fact is, if you want someone to cooperate, you want to set it up so that you will get that cooperation. And by giving them more control, giving them more choice, making them feel like they're more in the driver's seat, I really do think that that helps. I have found that I really do get much more cooperation when I say to the person, you get to have a lot of control about how and when this happens, but it needs to happen within a reasonable time frame.
Yeah. And Gretchen, you know how we say the opposite of a truth is also true. I also think it's true that if you just say every Monday night we talk about things that need to be talked about and it's not a
Yeah.
choice and it's just
Yeah.
established, that can also
Yes.
help because it kind of takes some of the
Yeah.
emotion away from it because it's not me saying we
Yeah.
need to talk about it. It's Monday
Yes.
night. That's when we do these things.
I've heard from so many people where they have sort of an administrative hour or whatever, and it works really well.
Yes.
This is someplace where you might want to think about the four tendencies. Again, if you don't know about the four tendencies, go to gretchenrubin.com/quiz and all will be revealed. But this is the kind of thing where, let's say if you had an upholder and an obliger, putting it on the calendar might work really, really well. And then people would just keep a running list. And then we know on Monday afternoon, we'll talk about it or whatever. If you're dealing with a rebel, that might be really difficult because they don't like that feeling of being
Right.
trapped into a time. It might be much more spontaneously. Like if at 11:30 at night, they're like, I'm ready to talk about it. You have to be like, okay, it's not what I would have picked, but if you're ready, I'm ready. So I think thinking about how to set it up for the four tendencies, because Jamie is a questioner, my husband's a questioner, I'll often say, like, if we don't decide this now, there might not be more availability.
Right.
Certain things, it's more efficient to decide now. Or airline tickets are going to go up. We need to figure this out so we can get our tickets now. And it's like, okay, that's a reason why we're doing it now instead of waiting 2 weeks. And so
Yes.
questioners want reasons, obligers need accountability, rebels need choice and freedom, or, tap into their identity. You have to think about how to tailor the decision and the strategy.
Yeah. And then, of course, Gretchen, we also have to remind ourselves to answer this question honestly, which is, do I need more information or do I need to just make a decision?
This is a real problem for me. I try to drag
too.
other people into things, and I realize I don't actually need them to weigh in. They do not have information that I need. I do not need to weigh their opinion. I am just trying to offload difficult decision making by pulling somebody else in and trying to foist it off on them. This is a play I make. And I realized, say to myself, I feel like I'm frustrated because I want to talk about this subject, but do I even need to talk about this subject? I should just call you, Elizabeth, and be like, I need to figure this out. And just it's what a friend of mine calls this intuiting by extroverting, which is like, for some people, talking through a problem is very effective and very comforting and really helps you arrive at a good decision. So Elizabeth, maybe you and I just need to do that more with each other. Even if we have nothing to add, it's like, oh, I'll listen to you talk about that.
Yes. No, and this whole thing is very true for me of Jack and what he's going to do in the summer. It's like, it needs to be talked about. Nobody wants to think about it. But if you don't think about it, the options start to close off. So I am going to take these tips to tackle a tough topic.
And maybe also a deadline, because it's just occurring to me now. Another thing that people say to delay is they say, why would we talk about this now? It's so far away. And you're like, well, it seems far away, but it's sooner than you think. And programs fill up. Some people just feel much more pressed for time than others do. And so this is another thing that can affect the timing of discussing something. So again, it's like, okay, well, maybe you think it's too early now. When do you think we need to talk about it by? And if it's like, well, what about at the end of the month? And you're like, okay, on the end of the month though, right? Then we're going to talk about it because then, so it's again, sort of working with the person to figure out why are they delaying? Why are they objecting? And letting them weigh in on how to have that conversation. This happened to me recently with Jamie. I think on my 24 for 24, I said how I really want to plan a family trip to Japan. And thank you to all the listeners who wrote in with all sorts of suggestions. I really, really want to go to Japan. But finally, I said to Jamie, we really need to sit down. This is a major trip. There's a lot of considerations. And we need to sit down and think about when could we go and how long would we need? And he said to me, look, Gretchen, he just took this big volunteer job with NYCHA, which is the New York City Housing Authority. It's a very, very, very big responsibility on top of his full-time job. And he's really excited about it, but it's just a huge responsibility. And he said to me, Gretchen, I just can't be away that long, that far away, when, I'm just starting this big new responsibility that's really important to me and is going to demand a lot. And I was like, well, thank you. Because now I'm like,
Okay.
it's not going to
Yes.
happen this calendar year, and I can stop fussing about it and stop bringing it up. But it
Yes.
took me really just like hopping around in front of him, being like, we got to talk about it, we got to talk about it.
Yes.
And finally he was just like, it's off the table. And I was like, okay,
Yes.
that is also an answer. And I
Yes.
get it. Like the minute he said it, I'm like,
Yes.
100%, I understand why this isn't the time for that adventure.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But I did that whole thing of like, we're going to have to talk about it. Can we talk about it later? You know, yeah, okay, we're going to sit around and talk about it. And he's like, okay, it's off the table. All right.
You talked about
We
it.
talked about it. So let us know if you do try this at home and how trying a topic tackler works for you. Elizabeth, I love the alliteration. We need to lean into alliteration more, I think. Let us know on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, Facebook. Drop us an email at podcast@gretchenrubin.com. Or as always, you can go to the show notes. This is episode 465, so you can go to happiercast.com/465 for everything related to this episode.
Coming up, we have a no homework book club hack. But first, this break.
At the start of the new year, every small business owner is asking themselves the same question. What's the one move I can make that'll take my business to the next level in 2024? LinkedIn Jobs knows that your success all depends on the team you surround yourself with. That's why LinkedIn Jobs has created the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. Elizabeth, one of the things that I've been wanting to do is to upgrade and streamline my newsletter. And I knew to do that, I had to work with the very best people. And I knew that to put together a team like that, I could turn to LinkedIn Jobs because LinkedIn Jobs makes it so easy to identify the right people for the right job.
LinkedIn also knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/Gretchen. That's linkedin.com/Gretchen to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, we are back with this week's happiness hack.
This is a great suggestion that comes from Sarah. She says, my suggestion is to start a no homework book club. I love getting together with friends to talk about books, but I don't enjoy a long, in-depth discussion of a single book or literary analysis. I saw a TikTok that suggested an alternate format for a book club, and I decided to try it. Each month you get together and everyone just talks about what they've been reading or listening to, books, podcasts, long-form articles, etc. You share what you liked and didn't, and if you'd recommend it to others. This format is low pressure and for me makes for a more interesting discussion because you learn about lots of books from a diverse group of people. It also solves the problem of a discussion petering out because people haven't completed the book. And it particularly appealed to my rebel sister, who is an avid reader and loves sharing her favorites, but wants to read what she wants to read. In my group, I volunteered to take notes on the recommendations, which I later type into a Google Doc. This isn't necessary, but our group really liked having it to refer to since we got so many reading recommendations. So I think this is a great idea because everybody loves recommendations. Elizabeth, what do you call at the end of Happier in Hollywood? You have a fun type.
Just a recommendation. Just our weekly recommendation, and it's of anything.
Yeah, I think people are always looking. What's a great podcast? What's a great TV show? In all my book groups at the end, we will say, oh, and what else are people doing that they would recommend? It's also great to tell people, hey, don't bother.
Yeah.
I started that, and there are people where that you trust their judgment, and if they read a book and they're like, I'm not sure I would recommend it. I'm like, okay, that's good to know too.
Yeah, it's really a true no-guilt book club.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite things about a book club is
Yes.
talking to people about other books. So I love this idea.
It is true. Many, many rebels will say that they don't want to do what somebody else tells them to do. And a lot of questioners also say, why would I read a book just because a bunch of people picked it?
Right.
All the tendencies can have issues with it. And this is a way that you can get around that. So I love that.
And it's really building relationships.
That is a huge part of why we are part of these groups. And here's a bonus hack. If you are joining us for the annual challenge of Write 24 in 24, and you want a free PDF so you can keep track of whether you're doing it, you can download that at gretchenrubin.com/resources. I'll post a link in the show notes. And I want to say thank you and gold star to the sharp-eyed listeners who reminded me that 2024 is a leap year. So now that page has been updated to include February 29th. So if you got the old sheet and you were wondering where your February 29th is, now it is there. So for people who don't break the chain or whatever, heard from a lot of people who are excited about Write 24 and 24. There's your free sheet.
Yay.
And now for an interview. Today we are going to be talking to Rohan Gunatillake, who has been described as a meditation entrepreneur, a title that I love.
He's the host of the popular podcast Meditative Story, which helps listeners cultivate mindfulness through story. It's a very original and engaging way to build your mindfulness, something many people want to do. Here's the description. Meditative Story combines the emotional pull of first-person storytelling with the immediate science-backed benefits of mindfulness practice, all surrounded by breathtaking and cinematic music.
I was a guest on Meditative Story, and I so enjoyed the experience. I'll post a link in the show notes, or you can just search for it if you go to Meditative Story and search for Gretchen Rubin. I really enjoyed that experience. In addition to his podcast, Rohan has worked in design in public sector healthcare, designed the app Buddhify, and wrote the book Modern Mindfulness: How to Be More Relaxed, Focused, and Kind While Living in a Fast, Digital, Always-On World. That sounds like something we all need.
Welcome, Rohan.
Welcome.
Hi there. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah, we're so happy to be talking to you.
Yes. So many people seem to take the view that to be more mindful, we need to shut ourselves off from technology. You've done a lot to harness the power of technology to help people become more mindful. What is your thinking in that area?
I guess my general approach to mindfulness has always been about including everything and including everything everywhere all the time. Rather than mindfulness being something that looks like something in particular. And technology is, I guess, part of that. And in conventional, if you think about conventional mindfulness training, you learn on the cushion, right? You learn in a sort of formal way. And then once you've got settled in that, your teacher might go, now go and take what you've learned into the rest of your life, into your relationship, into your work. But you've not learned in those situations. So you're learning in this sort of stylized lab environment, the cushion, the mat, whatever you want to call it, formal meditation, as I might call it. And then, whereas all the stresses are not in formal meditation, your stresses are in your day job or whatever it is, your family life. So, and that, that's a legitimate approach and it can work. But my preference is to turn that inside out. And why don't we start by learning in the messiness of life? Because that's where our stresses are. And then we can use formal practice to deepen that learning. And so technology is just part of that messiness. And so learning. So I think the danger is sort of compartmentalizing technology as something that is not mindful, just means it becomes a thing that we pathologize and demonize. And, I get it also because, I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to the history of mindfulness and meditation. I sort of, and, a lot of the Western mindfulness tradition comes from the early post-hippie movement, which is quite anti-technology, anti-digital. And so the echo of that is felt now in the question, isn't it, of well, we learn mindfulness in a very particular way, which, teachers, when you think about the generation, the great contemporary, say, American or Western teachers, the sort of Sharon Salzbergs, the Jack Kornfields, those sort of big names, they don't have very active digital lives. And so they don't teach about it. Whereas I'm sort of part of a generation who largely grew up with technology, certainly not grew up with technology and computers in our lives, but also grew up learning meditation. And so I'm part of a generation that have learned to do that all together. And it's sort of natural to me because I've had to, because so when I first got into meditation, I had the choice of, I was learning a very traditional style, but my life was, I was living in London at the time, working sort of corporate stuff, and I was loving it. It was fast, it was digital, it was relational. And so I had the choice of do I keep those two things separate? Or do I, but if I did, I almost felt like it wasn't relevant, because the whole point of mindfulness is to bring more wisdom and kindness and compassion and insight to your life. And if it wasn't doing that, then it wouldn't be working. So, and the great thing about the mindfulness tradition, it's always been an evolutionary thing. And it's changed and adapted over time. And I just think digital or technology is sort of the frontier. And I think frontier of sort of modern mindfulness. And I think there's a lot of interesting stuff happening there. And if you want to think about the history of mindfulness, it's always been about inclusion. So go back a couple of thousand years and it would be like, okay, you can't do mindfulness meditation unless you were a monk. And then they broke down that barrier and then said, actually, you can't do this unless you were a man. And then female traditions started. And then they said, oh, you can't do this unless you're Asian. And then that barrier changed. And now the barrier is actually around, you can't do this unless you turn off your devices. I've heard this story before, and I've seen historically how all these barriers have been removed. That's why I'm optimistic about mindfulness and the contemplative or wisdom traditions and technology, because unless we do, technology is not going away. Right. Spoiler alert for the next 100 years. It's not going away. And so if we don't include it, then it's no longer relevant. And so,
well, it certainly seems a lot more realistic and therefore more practical, and that people will be more likely to succeed because it's more in line with the actual way they live their lives, instead of setting aside this very special time that has special rules that might make it harder to be consistent with it. So what do you think are some of the biggest stumbling blocks that people face when trying to stay more mindful?
I think it's, in a way, it's in your mind, what is the image of what is being mindful look like?
Right.
And so, you talked well there, Gretchen, about the idea of digital detox or letting go of, like, turning your device off. And in a way, that's what people's mental models. So I think for me, it's because often it's the perception that I don't have time, I'm too busy. And these are all effectively perceptions of what this looks like. And so I always try to pull it back to, okay, what are you trying to achieve? So my working definition of mindfulness is using your attention to develop positive qualities on purpose. So for example, for some people that might be calm, for other people that be focus, for other people kindness, whatever it is that a particular individual wants to achieve. And then, okay, if you want to work on body awareness or kindness, then let's have a conversation about how do you do that whilst using your phone. And so it becomes a much more rich thing, because then it's no longer don't have to turn my technology off. It becomes a challenge, a creative challenge really, of how to do that in practice. So just an example, again, anyone who's gone to a yoga class or meditation class, first thing you do is you learn a body awareness technique. Become aware of your breath, become aware of the sensation of your body on the ground, whatever it might be. The example of using that with your phone is, whilst holding your phone, know what it's like to know what your phone feels like whilst you're using it, which sounds like such a simple, almost mundane instruction or idea. But what you are doing there is you're being physically present with the experience of scrolling Instagram, whatever it is, playing Candy Crush, like, doesn't really matter. And if you're able to do that at the same time as while you're doing what you're doing on your phone, then part of your mind is present, part of your mind, and because it's in contact with physical sensation, it means that you're less likely to get sucked into the wormhole of content, because there's just that little bit more settledness and presence. And so these little sort of hacks, so you talk about stumbling blocks, I think it's very much this seeing that actually that counts as mindfulness, and it's a way of bringing mindfulness into making it a layer on my existing life, rather than me having to find the time to go and do something. Quiet time is the luxury. It's the scarcest resource in a lot of people's lives.
Well, and again, I love how practical that is. You can do it while playing Candy Crush, That's as practical as it gets.
I don't know whether Candy Crush. I'm sure Candy Crush is still massive. I've never been. That's never been me. But yeah, and I think that's my thing about like creative, accessible ways to practice and explore mindfulness that's still sort of legit mindfulness that would pass the test and stuff that I've had to work out for myself because these are things that I do, and so you sort of take what I've done in my own practice effectively, and in my sort of all this stuff that whether it's apps or podcasts or whatever it is, I've just taken core classic techniques: body awareness, concentration, kindness, inquiry, these sort of very classic mindfulness techniques, and then go, okay, how do you do that whilst you're on the subway? How do you do that whilst you're browsing the web?
Right.
How do you do that when you're having a difficult conversation with a colleague or with a partner?
And that's a great lead into the question that we ask every guest, which is if you could suggest a try this at home suggestion for people to try starting tomorrow that doesn't take a lot of time, energy, or money that you think would boost their happiness, what would you suggest?
I would say something about, since we're talking about technology, something about distraction, right? So the one thing I would say would be get interested in the process of distraction. So when you're, every day, I'm doing some work, and then when I'm not, without me realizing, I'm suddenly go to a completely different device and I'm looking at stuff on my phone. And then what I've learned over time is that by becoming really interested in that process, you can catch it earlier and earlier in the process. The first thing you might notice, actually, I'm somewhere completely different. And then if you bring a bit more interest to it, you may even notice the movement of your hand going to your pocket or to your or to your whatever.
Yeah.
And then if you get really into it, it doesn't take very long. Literally, can just take a few days to get really into it. You can just feel that little nudge. It's not even a physical thing. It's like a little itch in the mind to go, oh, I wonder if And then it becomes really fascinating, because then you realize, certainly from my experiences, that I started noticing my mind state that initiated a distraction thing, a distraction process. And what I was noticing was that I was feeling bored or lonely. And that ended up in me going to my phone and check the football scores or whatever it might be. And I said, actually, what's happening is I'm actually trying to be kind to myself, because I'm actually I'm feeling a bit bored. And so I'm basically using this as a kind of comfort mechanism. And then the more I've learned about that, and then, you'll know this, both of you, so well, is that through all the conversations you have, which is the more we know about our pattern, especially if it's maybe a negative pattern, the less power it has. And we can just catch it a little bit earlier. And so, and just be okay with, I'm just feeling a bit bored. I don't necessarily need that. I can just sort of move on to the next thing. So that's my tip, is to get interested in distraction. And the more interested in distraction you are, the less likely it might happen.
Excellent. Well, I think that resonates with most of us, I believe.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. It was so great to get the chance to talk to you.
Great. Likewise. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rohan.
Thank you.
Coming up, Gretchen has an Identify the Problem demerit. But first, this break. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. A common misconception about relationships is that they have to be easy to be right. But sometimes the best ones happen when both people put in the work to make them great. Therapy can be a place to work through challenges you face in all of your relationships, whether with friends, work, your significant other, or anyone. I'm part of a writing team, Gretchen, and that is basically like being married. And I know a lot of writing teams who have gone into therapy together, and it's helped them with so many issues.
If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Become your own soulmate, whether you're looking for one or not. Visit BetterHelp.com/Gretchen Rubin today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Gretchen Rubin.
This year, Dell Technologies wants to help you do amazing things with their best tech. For a limited time only, save on select next-gen PCs like the XPS 13 Plus, where you can make the everyday easier with Windows 11. Plus, curate your dream setup with great deals on select monitors, mice, and more must-have electronics and accessories. When you shop online at Dell.com/deals, you'll have access to leading-edge technology to match your forward-thinking spirit and free shipping on everything. Again, that's Dell.com/deals.
This year, I am focused on saving and investing, but I still want to do things like travel. NerdWallet lets you compare top travel credit cards side by side to maximize your spending, some even offering 10 times points on your spending, which means you could end up with a free flight or maybe a better hotel room.
So what could future you do with smarter financial decisions? Compare and find smarter credit cards, savings accounts, and more today at nerdwallet.com. NerdWallet, finance smarter. Reminder, credit is subject to lender approval and terms apply.
Okay, we're back with this week's Demerit and Gold Star. Gretch, you're up with a happiness demerit.
Okay, so this is a demerit where I snatch triumph from the jaws of defeat at the end. Okay, so I always talk about identify the problem, right? Once we identify the problem, it's a lot easier to spot a solution, but it can be hard to identify the problem, so really work to identify the problem. Okay, so I've been talking about that for so long, and only recently, in the last week, did I identify a problem that was extremely easy to fix the minute that I identified it, after struggling with this for years. Okay, so this is what it is. Elizabeth, you know from doing live events with me, probably, that I have a curse with a countdown clock.
Yes.
If you do public speaking on a stage, very typically there's a countdown clock so that you know how much time you have. Because if you're supposed to speak for 40 minutes, it's very easy to be off by 10 minutes. It's just you need a clock to help you stay on time. And there is something about me, I have some kind of magnetic force where 8 times a countdown clock has failed. One time they did it with an iPad and the Wi-Fi went down. One time the person forgot to start it. One time they set the wrong time, so like it wasn't connected to what I was doing. Anyway, so I always say to people, I have a curse with the countdown clock. Watch it, watch it, watch it. But sometimes I'm in places where there is no countdown clock and there's not even a clock on the wall. Sometimes there'll be like a clock on the back wall, which as a speaker you can see and look at. So I was getting ready to do a workshop with a bunch of Yale Law School students, which was super, super fun. And I was getting ready for it. It was going to be long. And I thought, they're probably not going to have a countdown clock because it's, a fairly small group. And there might be a clock on the wall, but there might not be a clock on the wall. And then people are always like, oh, you can set your phone so it doesn't turn off so you can always see the time. But I'm like, I've tried that. That never really works, right? So identify the problem. What is the problem? I need a countdown clock. I need a clock that's visible that won't turn off. And then I'm like, I could just buy a travel alarm clock.
Yes.
It will show me the numbers.
A digital alarm clock.
Of which there are a bazillion. For $10, I bought one that is exactly what I need. I got it, took it to the workshop. It worked perfectly. And I had the brilliant idea, I'm going to take out the batteries because I only need it to work when I need it to work, which is rarely, but when I need it, I really need it. And this just solves a huge problem for me. And yet, it has taken me all this time to realize I don't need to worry about it. I can just fix it. So anyway, the demerit is taking so long to figure it out. But then I do give myself a gold star for having finally bought myself the clock that solves this problem.
That is so good. And so you can just keep it in the backpack you take with you to speak and it'll always be there. Yes, I love it.
I can always just put it somewhere where it's visible. And then in the end, I can always know. Yep. So Elizabeth, what is your gold star?
Well, Gretch, I am giving a gold star to my son, Jack, my 14-year-old son this week, because he gave a little speech at school about his boxing. So every week, a couple of different students have to speak in chapel. And he spoke about boxing and he did such a good job. Both what he wrote was really good. I thought his delivery was really good. And I mean, that is nerve-wracking. We talk a lot about public speaking and how hard it is. And one thing I love that his school does is really get the kids doing this every year, really starting in kindergarten. They have to do public speaking. It's very nerve-wracking, and he did a great job, and they showed a little video of him. And, he took it like a champ. So, to use the boxing metaphor. So, I was very proud, and I give him a gold star for that.
I give him a gold star as well because you sent a video to our family.
Yes.
And the thing is, he seemed so composed, so natural. It was hundreds of kids. This wasn't like stand up in front of your classroom. This is like an assembly. And he used the microphone. He just seemed so at ease. And one of the things about a speaker is if the speaker seems at ease, you feel more at ease. And if someone's really nervous, you feel their anxiety as a listener. And I just thought, oh my gosh, at 14, that is remarkable. Gold star to Jack. And gold star for the school for helping to help them build to that level of comfort with something that is so widely a source of anxiety for people.
Well, and something that for the rest of your life, at certain points, you need to speak in public.
Yeah.
So it's just such a good skill to build.
Yeah, a wedding toast, talking to a school group, giving a presentation at work.
A eulogy.
Yeah. No, gold star. The resource for this week. Okay, one of the things I'm doing for 2024 is I have reconfigured my 5 Things Making Me Happy newsletter to be sleeker, better, just generally upgraded. I'm really excited. And one of the elements that I've added is 5 things to try. This is once a month. It's part of the newsletter flow, and it suggests 5 things to try. It's a slightly different version of Try This at Home and hacks. It has practical tips and strategies to help you make progress on whatever your aims is. This is something that you just get once a month. So if you subscribe to the 5 things at the link in the show notes, you can sign up for my newsletter, and that is one of the things that you will get. And I love a tip and a hack and a strategy, Elizabeth, so I really love working on this one each month.
Absolutely.
So sign up. I will put a link in the show notes. And Elizabeth, what are we reading? What are you reading?
I am reading Class, a memoir by Stephanie Land.
And I'm just about to start My Own Country by Abraham Verghese. And that's it for this episode of Happier. Remember, try this at home. Try a tip to tackle a topic. Let us know if you tried it, if you could say it, and if it worked for you.
Thank you to Rohan Gunatillake. You can listen to his podcast, Meditative Story. Thank you to our executive producer, Chuck Reed, and everyone at Cadence 13. Get in touch. Gretchen's on Instagram and Threads and TikTok at Gretchen Rubin, and I am on Instagram and Threads at Liz Craft. Our email address is podcast@GretchenRubin.com.
And if you like this show, please be sure to tell a friend and subscribe to us, rate and review the show. That is how people discover a new podcast. Or you could talk about our podcast in your no homework podcast club.
Well,
we appreciate it.
Until next week, I'm Elizabeth Craft.
And I'm Gretchen Rubin. Thanks for joining us. Onward and upward. Elizabeth, don't you find that the way you get recommendations mostly is when people recommend it? I watch TV shows because people in a book club recommend it. I find a book because somebody in passing recommends it. Though I do listen to a lot of podcasts and read a lot of stuff that just gives recommendations. I love getting recommendations.
Yes. I mean, especially with podcasts, almost exclusively it's because someone recommended it. Or maybe I'll hear an ad for it.
You and Eliza and Eleanor listen to a lot of the same podcasts. I often am like, oh, I know that they want, this is a scam podcast. I know exactly who wants to listen to this. From the Onward Project.